Go ahead.
My name is Betty Miller. I'm founder and president of Guardian Angels program. We are a nonprofit provincial watchdog organization that responds to concerns over the treatment of residents in Ontario's nursing homes. We have been advocating for residents and their families for 20 years. Sadly, I still receive phone calls from families who have loved ones in long-term care with the same issues as they had 20 years ago. It is like nobody listens, nobody cares. Now I'd like to introduce our spokesperson, John Weiss.
Thank you so much, Betty. Good afternoon, members of the press and most welcome guests. I wish you all a happy new year. With the dawn of 2020, the Seniors Guardian Angels would like to look at the state of Ontario's long-term care facilities, also called nursing homes. Nothing has been learned from the horrific mass murders committed by Elizabeth Wetlaufer. The government commissioned a public inquiry, which was released last year, but has not enacted any of the recommendations from it. A key finding of the Wetlaufer public inquiry is the lack of accountability in the nursing home system. Nobody was found responsible. The patients in nursing homes are amongst the most vulnerable members of our society, the elderly and the disabled. The living conditions they endure in some nursing homes would not be tolerated elsewhere in our society. This is a violation of their human rights. In fact, this is a complaint I have filed with the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, who are proceeding with it. If you or I were to commit such heinous acts, we would face criminal charges. However, for long-term cares, there are no consequences to the perpetrators. Again, this is discrimination against the elderly and the disabled. So why does this happen? There is legislation that regulates nursing homes in Ontario, the Long-Term Care Homes Act, which is not enforced, not in a meaningful way. This is the fundamental problem. Most nursing homes in Ontario are privately owned and operated as for-profit business under license from the Government of Ontario. The short-sighted and unethical ones are financially incentivized to violate this legislation to reduce their costs. There are two key factors that exacerbate this. The first is a lack of responsibility. Law School 101 states that a crime has an action, an actus rei, and an intent, the mens rea. So hypothetically, if you were to deliberately hit someone, there is your action and there is your intent, and you could be charged with criminal assault. However, when this action and intent becomes obfuscated with bureaucracy, it is not known who did what, and as the Wetlaufer inquiry concluded, no one is responsible. This is not surprising, as lack of responsibility is baked into the way the Ministry of Health functions with bad operator nursing homes. A common refrain by staff is to paraphrase, "I know what I do is against the legislation, but I do it anyway." The second exacerbating factor is a slow turnaround. My experience is that it took 1 year from the time the ministry received initial notification of serious patient mistreatments to the actual on-site inspection to a report being written and the issuing of compliance orders. Compliance orders are basically a slap on the wrist saying, try to do better next time. There are no financial penalties. Nobody goes to jail. After this, the cycle repeats over and over. The same horrific treatment is reported to the ministry, who eventually sends out inspectors, often the same inspectors, who validate the same legal infractions and write the same reports and issue the same compliance orders at the same nursing homes. The Ontario Ministry of Health has targeted wait times for non-life-threatening surgeries. Here is an example of hip replacement surgery. However, the Ministry of Health has no such target times to enforce the legislation for nursing homes, providing patients with the necessities of life, like food, baths, and protection from abuse. This is discrimination to healthcare based on age and disability. While this problem is ostensibly the passivity of the ministry in not enforcing the Long-Term Care Health Act, there is evidence that the ministry is actively aiding and abetting long-term cares in perpetuating the mistreatment of their patients. It is common to have long-term care management who are formerly Ministry of Health inspectors and vice versa. This cross-pollination has created at best a very fraternizing relationship between parties who should be at an arm's length. I question how many other inspection reports have been deleted or modified at the behest of nursing home management without the public's awareness. How are ministry staff being incentivized or compensated by some nursing homes to allow such mistreatment and to suppress information that should be available to the public? There is no way for prospective patients and their families to determine which long-term cares are good operators and which are bad operators. The ministry have a classification system for this, but they refuse to disclose the results to the public. Journalists with the Ottawa Citizen asked the ministry for this information, and they were refused. It is a great concern for public safety and the state of democracy that the Government of Ontario will not enforce its own Long-Term Care Homes Act in a meaningful way. This is the first and most fundamental step. In a rule of law society, the legislation must be enforced and must be respected. Otherwise, it is meaningless. This concludes the presentation. Does the press gallery have any questions for Betty or myself?
What has the ministry told you? I know that you sent a letter to Merrilee Fullerton. Have you received a response?
I did not receive any reply. And at that, I had proceeded with the formal complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal.
So what would you say to Merrilee Fullerton right now in terms of dealing with this and how crucial the timeline is for some of these seniors in these homes to deal with it?
I would say take action now. As I've said, the legislation has to be enforced. I do realize that there is a further element of the inquiry that is going to be released this spring, but the answer is not new legislation. If the existing legislation is not enforced in a meaningful way, why try and bring in new legislation? One, that takes time, and we need action right now. For such rogue nursing homes, the bad operators who are treating their patients so badly, it is time to issue the necessary remedies, and that is a mandatory management order, a MMO. What this means is that the existing management of a bad operator nursing home is relieved of their duty, and a third-party management organization is brought in to remediate the problems. This is the necessary remedy in homes that have such heinous violations to human dignity, not to mention the actual legislation.
The government has said that a case like Elizabeth Wetlaufer will never happen again in this province. They want to ensure that that happens. Do you think that a case like that could happen right now?
Of course it could.
Certainly.
Nothing has changed. I do see the Elizabeth Wetlaufer as being very much a black swan, a very much out of the norm to have serial killers. That said, though, the system is in such state of disarray. If a Elizabeth Wetlaufer were to become an employee of one of these bad operator nursing homes tomorrow, there could be another mass murder. That is, it's not the system that is preventing it. It is, all it takes is another psychopathic individual to be in that role. And here we go again. Betty, did you have something to say about that?
Well, no, one thing I was going to say, something else was about when one of the inspections were done, 60%. Oh, sorry, 60% of the inspection of the homes, there were 60%. I guess it was 60% there weren't any nurses, RNs, in the building. 60% of the times that they were there. Yeah, there was no RN in the building. And that has to be, that's legislated too. There has to be an RN in the building on all shifts.
A lot of the times, some of these folks aren't able to advocate for themselves. Tell me what the impact is on their families, and also if you can give us any anecdotal information about a situation that you may have witnessed personally when it comes to the living conditions, when it comes to food.
Well, I've seen families it had happened what John has said, no food, no bathing, and so on. It's a huge impact on the families. And the problem is, if they start to create any problems in the home, it's against the legislation, against the law, but they can ask the family not to appear again. Off the premises, not.
What is it like? I'm just wondering emotionally what it's like to witness someone living in those conditions, living in this scenario.
It's heartbreaking. It's terrible what the families go through, and they are upset. They don't want to see their loved ones treated that way. But if they speak up too much, then they can be given that notice that they can't come back into the home, and it's not legal. They can't do that. But in order to fight it, they actually have to be arrested and get a lawyer, and which costs a lot of money for them. So it's not legal.
But if you could just kind of describe from an emotional perspective what, on a human level, this is like to see.
First of all, my own mother was in an excellent long-term care for the last 10 years of her life, and I did not have one problem. I did not have one complaint. There are good operator nursing homes out there. When my mother-in-law went into this bad operator nursing home, I was just stunned by the whole thing. We had problems right from day one. I felt very helpless, as there was nothing we can do about it. My mom-in-law was in a position where the family, myself included, could not care for her any longer, and we felt very trapped in this. We did eventually move my mom-in-law out to a good operator nursing home, which is difficult to do. For a lot of families, that isn't an option, and it takes a long time. So we felt very trapped, very helpless. There was simply nothing we could do. We had calculated that she was visited about 1/24th of the time, so 1 hour out of every day she had visitors. And we just encountered so many problems, it just begs the question, what happens in the other 23 hours of the day? The heinous treatment is one thing, but just the not knowing is something else. When my mom was in a good operator long-term care, there was a sense of relief, as I felt she was being well looked after. All I had to do was be a good son and visit her. It was, I don't want to say it was great, but it was the best option for her and for the family. Then with my own mother-in-law, it was the reverse, where there was no feeling of relief. I felt that we were still caring for her, that we had to watch out for her, or the condition was just going to get worse. And despite all of the efforts that I have done and Betty have done, we have seen this worsening of conditions in long-term care.
Incidentally, I do companion care in a nursing home in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Upper Canada Lodge, and that place, it's amazing. They've got an amazing director of care, amazing administrator, good staff. So it tells you there are good homes. It isn't all bad. There's good caregivers. There's ones that really care. But like in any job, there's those who are, it's a job and it doesn't matter to them. And what we suggest at Guardian Angels is a camera. If I was putting a loved one in a nursing home at this time, I would put a camera in the room. Again, they will tell you that that's illegal to do it. They will want you to take it out, but it isn't illegal. You can do that. And then if there's a fall, if there's some abuse, you see what's happening. You don't have to wait to be told they don't know what's been happening.
Very true.
Yeah.
You talked about the number of inspectors that are missing from and the time it takes for the report to be completed.
Yes.
Do you think it's unlikely that there will be more inspectors?
Well, first of all, is the problem a lack of inspectors or inspection? I would contend the problem is the lack of enforcement. First of all, I think the inspectors I have dealt with done an outstanding job. I've absolutely nothing against their work and the quality of the reports. The problem is when there is no enforcement, they're just going back again and again. So they will say that they are very backlogged. I don't doubt that. But if there was meaningful enforcement, there would be less infractions. And if there are less infractions, basically there would be a greater incentivization of nursing homes to comply. Where there is this incentive to comply, there is going to be less work for the inspectors. So I'm not saying that the system was designed to employ the greatest number of inspectors to get the minimal amount of result, compliance, but that is the way the current system is working without enforcement.
And incidentally, the shortage of staff, the frontline staff just isn't there. There's not enough, and we've talked about it for years, and they just don't hire enough frontline staff. They can't possibly do what they have to do for the residents with the amount of residents they have to care for.
And
They definitely need more help.
do you think that instead of creating new beds, the government should focus on fixing those that are already there? Or like ensuring that the quality of service is there before opening new homes?
Good question, because it is a kind of a Hobson's choice, because one, we do need more long-term care beds. Looking at the demographics and the baby boomers approaching the geriatric stage, more beds are necessary. There is no way around that. What really concerns me, though, is we have this system right now that is inefficient. The lowest hanging fruit is the lack of enforcement. It makes the most sense to start enforcing. This will improve the quality of care, and it's a lot easier to justify adding more beds to a system that is working better, as opposed to just creating more beds. That's throwing money at the problem and is not going to fix the underlying issues. Yes?
You mentioned that the majority of homes are private and 58% are for-profit. What impact does that have on the quality of care in nursing homes?
Betty, do you want to take that?
Well, I do. I think that if you can get into, like, the nursing home that I'm talking about, Upper Canada Lodge, it is a government home. So it's not a private one. I think you are better in those homes. They're a little bit better, but there's still a lot of abuse that goes on. Yeah.
Actually, I just have to add something on that as well, too. The nursing home that my own mother is in, and now my mother-in-law in, as a plug, it is Lanark. It's part of the SRC group that does an excellent job. So I feel that I don't want to slam the private sector, because they are good operators and they do provide there are good operators out there, lots of them, who provide a good quality product. So much as I do appreciate public-run homes as well too, I don't want to draw the apple or oranges comparison. There are good and bad homes in the private sector, and I'm sure in the public sector that there are bad homes as well too.
Although they're in the private sector, there's the difference between non-profits and for-profits.
Yes.
That's true, right? So the SRC, I believe, is a non-profit, or is it not?
The SRC group is a for-profit.
So you mentioned staffing shortages, which has been a persistent problem going back 15 years or so, I believe. There is a legislation right now, proposed legislation, the Time to Care Act by the NDP, which has been proposed now 3 times in the last 3 or 4 years. Do you think that legislation, do you endorse that legislation? And do you believe that that will be one way of adequately addressing this issue?
Actually, I'm going to turn that over to Betty first, then I'll give my comment.
Well, yeah, I think I agree with it. Yeah. The NDP. Do you, John?
Yes, I do. That being said, though, the legislation is not the solution to the problem, because as we've seen, existing legislation is not followed. So my thought is, as a first step, enforce the existing legislation to see what it can do and what it can't do.
But then do you not agree that having more staff, which is what the Time to Care Act bill calls for, will make it easier to enforce current legislation. Because right now, when people don't get fed, when people don't get toileted, when people are in soiled diapers for hours and hours, it's because there's not enough staff. And the Time to Care Act bill resolve that issue if it's enforced or if it's implemented.
Yeah.
You are correct. Betty,
And
go ahead.
we have been advocating that for many years, that is one of the biggest problems, is not enough staff. So I agree with
The Time
that.
to Care Act has been, proposed thrice now. It passed second reading in November 2017, and the Liberals did not chose not to enact it, and the Conservatives now are not enacting it, despite the fact that they supported the bill when they were in opposition. What forces are behind, this bill not being passed? Like, what are the systemic issues over here?
Do you understand that? I don't know why things aren't.
I do not know. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with
Yeah.
all the facts. I don't claim any knowledge of the. Go ahead, Zay.
Yeah, so I would suggest that one reason is that the for-profit lobby, and I understand not all for-profit homes are bad. I understand that there's exceptions, but there's a lot of research out there by academics showing that nonprofits and municipal homes tend to have better staffing ratios because they are not incentivized to make a profit, and which is not true for all homes, but it's a general trend that's been proven by research over and over again. So and the for-profit lobby, the Ontario Long-Term Care Association, has opposed the Time to Care Act bill, which also donates a lot of money to Liberals and Conservatives and NDP, but not as significantly. And do you not think that's a factor too? The lobbying that happens in the background.
You hit upon yes, I don't. There is things going on in the background that I'm not party to, but you hit upon a really key point there, where the public sector doesn't have the profit motif, that they are not incentivized. And the corollary of that, as I pointed out, is that the reverse does happen, where the private sector is very incentivized to do things in a financially efficient way. I don't dispute their need to have a profit motive to turn a profit. So, well, it's nice that the public sector homes do not have that temptation to cut corners. The private sector does, and this is one of the problems. The bad operator homes that are incentivized to cut corners because they can get away with it.
I agree. Definitely.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Though I'm not a press person, as I said. The question of training. I've heard reports that people are being hired for PSW jobs who are not appropriately trained, and also that they are being hired from agencies that are dubious indeed. And I wondered if you knew anything about that.
Betty?
Yes, I do. That's right. We for years again have tried to get one standard course for PSWs. But you can go to a college for a couple of years course, but you can also go to the course for 6 months. And I also don't think those courses treat too much about compassion, understanding that these people are so vulnerable, and some of the things that the residents do, they can't help it. It's their illness, it's their disease. And I don't think they learn too much about that, a lot of them. As I said, there's a lot of good ones, very good.
And have you run into problems with the agencies that are between the homes and the hiring?
I haven't really run into problems with that because I'm not involved in the agencies in hiring. And again, I know there are some better agencies than others, but yeah, I'm not really involved in that.
Thank you.
So, no other questions?
You know what, I have one last question.
Go
In regard
ahead.
to inspections and enforcement, is there any difference between the conduct of this government versus the last one?
I haven't really seen any.
In all fairness, go ahead.
Well, no, I haven't seen any difference. In all fairness, hopefully,
Yeah.
it will happen. It hasn't happened yet. I don't know.
I would say the exact same thing.
Yeah.
There has been no sign of any kind of changes with the new government, but the Ford government is new into their mandate, and we hope that they take up the gauntlet on this and enforce the government's own legislation.
Okay.
Great. I thank you all for your time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for coming.
Thank you.